So, the advantage of Chatterbox Academy and kind of what makes us a little bit different from other academies or language programs out there is that we are located in Mexico. The majority of our teachers live in or near Mexico City, some in other parts of Mexico. So, it really helps us to have that real world Spanish influence. For example, when I'm teaching my classes, I will often bring in a phrase or two that I hear every single day here in Mexico City. And language is a living thing, right? It's always evolving, it's always changing. So the fact that we actually live in basically the heartbeat of the Spanish language here in Mexico gives us an advantage over other language programs and definitely gives us an advantage over maybe a textbook based high school Spanish program. Textbooks are great, and we also use them as part of our curriculum, but there's nothing quite like being in touch with the living heartbeat of the language as people are using it every single day. So I learned Spanish in high school, actually. I didn't have a special program. I wasn't in a dual immersion school. I just had a regular old high school Spanish 1, Spanish 2, Spanish 3, AP Spanish, and that was it. The difference is I went into that Spanish program knowing that I was going to be fluent no matter what it took. So that approach and my goals of fluency is what helped me to really milk that program for all it was worth. And then when I moved to Mexico, I like to tell my students that's when I realized how little Spanish I knew. So when I moved here when I was 24 years old, I started having to talk to people regularly, people that did not speak English. And that just use of Spanish, chatting with friends, telling stories, trying to relate to people is what really just projected my Spanish progress forward. And I like to bring that approach into the classroom. There's actually a really cool story I wanted to tell you. When I first moved to Mexico, as I said, I was 24 years old. I lived in Pennsylvania previously, and I had some friends at this Mexican restaurant called Tres Hermanos. They were all guys from Mexico, and I told them before I moved here, oh, I'm moving to Mexico, and they were so excited for me. And then when I went back, on vacation to Pennsylvania, after 6 months of living here in Mexico, the guys were shocked, and they told me, they're like, oh my god, you sound like you're from Mexico City. Like, I had picked up the accent of the people in Mexico City after living here for 6 months. So that was a really cool illustration of how actually being in the environment really influenced my language skills. I kind of like to describe our teaching style and philosophy as a 1-2 punch. So, based on what you know about my history and how I learned Spanish, you're going to see how that influences our teaching approach here at Chatterbox Academy. I like to do kind of both things. So I see a great benefit to the traditional high school Spanish programs with the textbooks and the grammar and the conjugations. And I also see great benefit to that full immersion approach of hearing real speech and imitating the speech patterns of native speakers. So I try to bring both into the classroom as I design our curriculum. And I do personally design most of our curriculum. So we will have conjugations and verb and grammar rules. I believe that's an important part. And I do use a textbook. If I ever doubt anything or I just want a little bit of structure, I'll use a textbook to guide my lesson creation. And I'll also include full immersion style questions, answers. I'm doing more comprehensible input, which is where you can figure out things based on the context. It builds on each other throughout the lesson. So you're going to see that in the classes. Of course, each teacher here at Chatterbox Academy might have their own little bit of a different style and approach, but that's the general approach that we have here at Chatterbox Academy. And again, my personal experience really informs this. So I've seen friends, real world friends here in Mexico that came to Mexico with zero prior experience in Spanish. And I noticed that those friends really struggle to understand the why behind some of the phrasing or the grammar. And that makes it more difficult for them to remember new words. But once I can help explain things like that to them, then it clicks and they can remember things because it's no longer just memorizing. It's like, oh, this is a puzzle that actually has rules, right? And once I learn the rules, I can start to anticipate how to figure things out. On the flip side, I know plenty of people who have only taken like the traditional high school Spanish class that's really focused much more on like conjugations and reading, and they struggle to speak, to actually have a conversation with people while they can understand. So I've noticed that both approaches have their pros and cons, and that's why I try to blend a little bit of both in our classes so that our students will really understand the why, the foundations behind everything in Spanish, but also feel confident conversing with real people. So there's two main things I want my students to know that's not really common for teachers to tell you, or if they do, they didn't really tell me when I was learning Spanish. Number one, especially for us teenagers and up, I want us to look at mistakes as a good thing. It feels awkward because I think most students are used to the traditional school approach of you want to get 100%, right? You want to get everything right on the test. And that's good. We want to be accurate, of course, but sometimes what happens is we worry so much about making mistakes that we lock up and we don't want to say anything. And that really hinders our progress, especially when learning a language. So I want us not only to get used to making mistakes, but I want us to be comfortable and actually see it as a good thing. I tell my students, if you're making a mistake, you're learning and you're progressing. Good. That's how we want to think of it. The other key to fluency that I would like students to understand is that your Spanish class is really kind of just like your launch pad. Remember back when I said like how I learned Spanish? I went into that high school Spanish class bound and determined to be fluent. And I realized that speaking, like only doing the homework and only doing everything in class was not going to get me fluent. It was a great start. But if I wanted to be fluent, I had to do anything and everything I could to expose myself to the language. And that was difficult because I don't come from a Spanish-speaking family. Now I am. I'm married into a Spanish-speaking family, and Spanish is our main language at home. But when I was learning, that was not the case. I lived in central Pennsylvania with no Spanish-speaking family, no Spanish-speaking friends, and I really didn't have much exposure. So I did anything that I could, anything I could get my hands on. And this was like pre-ChatGPT, but way back in the day. So I would get a hold of any type of literature I could get in Spanish, music in Spanish. I would start listening to the radio, like Mexican radio stations, and listen to the, what are those called in English? Locutores, the people talking. I can't think of the word. Anyway, the people that would talk between the songs. I would listen to their conversations on the radio, like anything I could get my hands on. And that's the message I would like to get across to my students, that if you want to get fluent in Spanish, classes with us are going to be a great start. But you've got to do anything you can outside of class to put your Spanish into practice. One of the key questions we get is, what's the difference between Mexican Spanish and Spanish from other countries? Am I going to understand other people, or are other people going to understand me? That's a really common question that students and families ask. Of course, here at Chatterbox Academy, I highlight in a lot of our class descriptions that we teach Mexican Spanish. And that's because many of the teachers are Mexican. I live in Mexico City. So I highlight that so that people will know exactly what you're getting when you get to our classes. However, I can assure you that Mexicans don't speak some other weird dialect. They speak Spanish. I know this because I've traveled to other places and people don't have any trouble understanding me, and I don't have any trouble understanding them. Couple of examples. When I traveled to Spain, zero problem understanding or communicating with people. When I've traveled to Guatemala, zero problem understanding or communicating with people. I like to compare it to like Australian English versus American English versus British English. It's all English, right? But there's a different accent, and then each place might have its own regional phrases that they use. So if you get a really niche regional phrase, say in the middle of Scotland, somebody in California might not know what that person is saying, right? Even if they're speaking English. same situation. If I'm teaching you a super regional phrase like from the backwoods of Oaxaca, even somebody in Mexico City might not know what that means. But I really do try to make sure that the Spanish that we teach in class is universally understood. And if I teach you something that I like to call a Mexicanism, I make that clear to the students. I say, hey, this is a phrase we typically use in Mexico, and sometimes it might even be a phrase we typically use in Mexico City. But I always explain that that's a specific regional phrase, and it's kind of a bonus. It's like bonus content. The core language that we're teaching is Spanish language that's going to be understood globally.
Cuando grabé este video me di cuenta que no me escuchaste hablar en español, así que ya me escuchas, ¿cómo ves? Thank you so much for watching this intro video to understand a little bit more about Chatterbox Academy. Remember, there is a free beginner video lesson and like homework available on the closed loop landing page, which you might be on right now, or you can scan the QR code right here to get instant access, no sign up, nothing necessary. I just want you to be able to check out what my teaching is like and get some free stuff. Why not? So check that out if you haven't already. And we would love to have you in a Spanish class. Join us today. Nos vemos. Hasta luego.